Right, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. It's a bit more civilised hour in Australia, so thank goodness for daylight saving. I'd like to start off with a few acknowledgements. First of all, I've used a few bits out of the pattern books, so I'd like to acknowledge the source. And quite a few people I have either photographed their collections or including the Barters, and they have supplied me with pictures. So in particular, Linda and John Barter, Chris Davenport, Carolyn Keating, and Andrew Sheldon. I'm going to talk about covered boxes, and these are what are called covered boxes in the pattern books. There are 9 entries in the pattern books specifically for covered boxes, round or octagonal, 3 entries for powder boxes, and there's also some entries for some boxes with cowan lids, little ladies, and some fruit on the lid, and we'll talk about those later. Now, powder boxes seem to have mostly been used for the smaller sizes. There's a listing, for example, in a Harmony catalogue where it seemed to be 2 smaller sizes. But it seems to me that we should be calling them, we can call them covered or powder, but we should call them boxes, not bowls, if we want to follow the pattern books. The manufacturing period is somewhere in the early 1920s through to more or less the demise of the earthenware factory. Backstamps accord with this. But the earthenware pattern books, unfortunately, have very few dates, so they're not much help. But there is an earthenware pattern, which is 28 patterns earlier than the first powder box thing, and it was registered in September 1921. So it seems to me that they probably commenced in about 1922. And pattern 8389 shown there is the earliest pattern entered in the pattern books for them. They came in round shapes or 8-sided shapes, and they had mostly the round ones had tapered round knobs, but with a few special knobs. The octagonal boxes had 8-sided base to the knobs, and the knobs were 8-sided, so they tapered also. Sizes in round, there are 3 sizes known, and according to the pattern books, there were 3 sizes, and I have measured them, and they are 125, 150, 175 millimeters, which corresponds to 5, 6, and 7. Octagonal, and there's a little bit out of the pattern book there, which shows there were 3 sizes measured from one corner across to the opposite corner, but I've only been able to measure 2 of them, and I don't know what the 3rd size was, but I would speculate that it was probably in a bigger size, the 7-inch, that matches with the round sizes. Now, there are a few lidded wares which I have seen advertised on the internet as powder boxes. They include soap dishes. Now, soap dishes, if they're intact, have a drainer inside them, but that's often missing, and you'll see that on the top right of the picture, there's a soap box without its lid inside, and it looks not dissimilar to covered boxes I'm talking about. And they have a different knob. They don't have a knob at all. In fact, they have a handle. And there are also some trinket set boxes. Now, at the top is a nearly complete trinket set box, but if you look at the catalogue entry below, you'll see that they normally had 2 candles. This has only got 1 candle. And on the top right in the top picture is a trinket box in the same pattern. Now, the patterns they used on them were numerous. They seem to have been quite popular, covered boxes. So there's the 12 patterns listed for covered or powder boxes, an example shown below left. Then there are a lot of earthenware patterns where the shapes were not specified. And a typical example of a kingfisher below, they were used on all sorts of wares, vases and things like that. And then there are patterns which were first entered for toilet wares and got used with the same pattern numbers on covered boxes, and they may have been intended as extra accessories for toilet sets, I don't know. Now, we'll start off looking at some patterns, because there's not all that much more to say about covered boxes, but there are some patterns listed for covered boxes, powder boxes, and didn't seem to be used on other pieces, and some examples shown here. And I'm taking them in numerical order, which means in date order pretty much. And the butterfly pattern we've already seen. The one on the right, I do remember at one of the British clubs weekends, there was quite a debate. A lady produced one of these, and there was a debate as to whether it had been done in factory or out of factory, because some of the painting looked a bit crude for Shelley, but it's definitely in the pattern books, and there it is. A plain blue one and a lusted one with peacock feathers, highly stylized. And a few more. This is into the Art Deco era, so they're all pretty geometric, and some of these came in multiple colorways. I've only found pictures of one, or I've only included one in this lot here. And to finish up, a couple more. Now, the pattern on the bottom right, which is called Persian in the pattern book entry, was used on a number of shapes, but in the shapes that were listed, in powder boxes were included. So I've included it in patterns listed for cut by powder boxes. Now, there are a lot more entries for earthenware where the shapes weren't specified and were used on multiple shapes, including Surrey scenery. That one originally was orange lusted, but seems to have lost some of its luster near the knob. Blue Dragon, Loisonne, a couple more with what birds that are called cranes in the pattern books, although cranes in Australia, when they are flying, have their necks extended. These ones may have been adjusted slightly for artistic purposes. Some butterflies and a bit of marble pattern. Some bubbles patterns, and they appeared in a few different colorways on powder boxes and on lots of other wares. And a couple of geometric ones at the bottom, which again are very Art Deco. And a powder box, I'll talk more about that pattern in a minute, but on the top with a yellow band and a couple showing that the same patterns were used on both round and on the 8-sided powder boxes or covered boxes. And a few more in different colorways. And a couple of crane patterns showing they were used on round and the octagonal boxes. The one on the right's had a pretty hard life because it's lost nearly all the black that should be on the outside of the wings of the birds, and it's lost nearly all the green on the bound, but on the band around the bowl itself or the box. But it was the best picture I could find of it on that. And a couple more Art Deco type patterns. And a few more general patterns. The two kingfishers down at the bottom, you're probably aware that on larger pieces, the two birds were often shown, and the picture in the middle is from a bowl. But on smaller pieces, it was usual to only use one bird as the decoration. This one in the pattern book entry is called New Intarsio, but it's often called Moorcroft style. And on the right is a Moorcroft vase, and you can see that they're pretty similar. You probably mostly know the story, but apparently Moorcroft rang up Percy Shelley and objected to the similarity and threatened to sue, and they came to an agreement that Shelley would sell what they had already made, which was only about 2 or 3 weeks production, I think, and then cease making this pattern. You can see the Moorcroft one here has a couple of little birds included as well, and Shelley didn't use any birds on their patterns. The Moorcroft ones had a little raised outline around the pattern. The Shelley ones were raised slightly all over for the pattern above the surface. A couple more, one I think that's often called Japanese gardens top left, and some exotic birds which don't match any birds known to me anyway, and another Art Deco. Now, there were a couple of patterns as entered for toilet wares. There's the pattern book entry, top left, and there's a covered box and a bowl and a basin in that pattern. But it also, the pattern of the covered box just used the same pattern number as the toilet ware. And here's another one which was with the blue band was first entered for toilet wear, and you can see an example top left, but it was also produced with two different colors, the yellow band there, and I think it was a pink band from memory, and they got their own numbers. There are also some patterns that were used on multiple shapes, and Cloisonne, the blue version shown here, is one of them. It used on vases and other things, and on toilet wares and on covered boxes. Now, there's quite a few patterns with unknown pattern numbers, at least I couldn't find them. Scottish motto wares don't seem to have ever had pattern numbers. They were just a blue with some wording in white, and the Scottish ones had a little thistle. They were lusted, and depending on the light that they were taken in, the luster shows up more on some than on others. A lusted box, which is signed Walter Slater, so I think it's almost certainly a one-off, but I can't find any entry for it in a pattern book. That yellow version of bubbles, there are a number of bubbles patterns entered in the pattern books, different colorways, but I can't find an entry for the just yellow one, but I might have missed it. And harmony wares. And there were quite a few harmony wares. I don't know whether the banded one on the right really is a harmony wear, or the banded one top left is really harmony wear, which was mostly dripped wear, where they had but I've put them in this bit anyway. And then there are some boxes with special knobs. Now, these, the only ones I've ever seen had a kneeling lady, and there are 5 entries for a kneeling figure. There are also 2 for a reclining figure. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the kneeling figure is very similar to a kneeling figure that she used in one of her China patterns. Now, I'll just point out that there are no pattern book entries for some of the ones with a lady on them for the box colours. Here's an example of 4 of them. You'll see the ladies are all different colourways. I've included one picture of a lady as a bit of a blow-up just to show a bit more detail. They're very pretty, but as I said, in addition to the pattern book entries, there are other colourways used for the boxes and for the ladies to match. Now, confusingly, well, not confusingly, but surprisingly, there are 2 entries for a reclining figure, and I've highlighted them here. 173 is for a kneeling figure, 174 is for a reclining figure, and 175, which has a date on it, 1927, is for a reclining figure. I have never seen a reclining figure on a powder box, and I honestly don't know whether it was ever went into production. I've asked a number of people in the clubs, and as far as I know, no one else has, but I might be surprised after this talk that they're just not known to me. There is a reclining figure that she used as a China pattern shown here, And it might have been something like that, although I would have thought that was a bit too spread out to make a convenient knob. But she might have had her legs folded or something like that and been sitting up a bit more. Anyway, if anyone has one, I would love to see a picture. And then there are some boxes. There are two with fruit on the knob. One is an oven blue box and the other is liquid gold, and they came in the 5-inch, 6-inch and 7-inch sizes, the usual sizes. You can see that the fruit seems to have been painted in different colours, even if the box was the same colour. For example, the two on the left, the larger fruit, one is a pink colour, the other is a white colour. Now, there's a few other earthenware boxes with lids. They go back to, in Wildman times, a couple of Intarsio square boxes. One entered in the pattern books as square box and the other was square box with cover. They have different knobs. The one on the right has a much flatter lid than the one on the left. And there is an Intarsio, I don't know whether you should call it a lidded bowl or a lidded pot, but the one on the left is the Intarsio version. And for a very short while, Wildman and Company started a 5000 series. And when they put gold lining around the pattern on the Intarsio, they gave it a new name. They stamped out the Intarsio name and put a Cloicello stamp in, and they updated the number from 3054. They overpainted in gold 5054. There are very few that I know of where that's happened, but the one on the right is an example. After that, a very short while after that, they stopped using the Cloicello name and they stopped changing the number. So the 5000 series only seems to have about 4 or 5 entries, I suspect. And just a word on Cloicello, which has got nothing really to do with covered boxes, but Shelley seemed to have liked the name Cloicello. Wildman used it first on the 5000 ones. Then a few years later in Shelley times, they used it for a peony pattern. It came with several different background colours, including black. Then they dropped that, and eventually they used it for the white daisies on blue background pattern. And there were two versions. They introduced the one on the left first, and then they put in some roundels into the pattern and gave it a couple of different numbers, depending on whether there's some gold on some of the pictures. And that one, the roundels, came from the very first Wildman and Company registered pattern way back in 1888. It had a different background to the daisies. Now, these, I know I photographed up the Barters many years ago, but a rectangular and a square box. They have recessed handles, which are reminiscent of the ones used on Hyderabad and a bit of barware that Shelley made. And I have no details. They have a back stamp, which is from the 1925s to 40s range for earthenware, no pattern numbers, and I can find no entries in the pattern books for them. There were a few china boxes with lids. Here's one example, an acorn, and this picture is courtesy Chris Davenport, and also the details about it. And he said it's decorated by John Evans, a Shelley apprentice, and Shelley paid for him to attend a course at RCA, which I think is Royal College of Arts in London for 3 years. But anyway, he did the decorations on it. But the same shape of box with the same acorn lid also is found with a china pattern, maybe more china patterns than this, but this one has a one called Rose Spray, one that's entered and used on other wares. And this one is signed A. Taylor. And these pictures incidentally came from Carolyn Keating. I'd not seen them before. And this one has what I take to be a little bit of a flower knob in the middle. A. Taylor is known to have painted other things for Shelley. So I think he was a contract or brought in to do a bit of painted decoration after the war, when the hand decorations and hand painting had just about finished. And finally, this one with some vine leaf and some fruit, at least I take it to be a vine leaf, but no pattern number again. And I am quite unable to find anything for it in the pattern books. I've had a good look. Now, that's about all I can say about covered boxes, but I hope you may have learnt something. So that's the end.